Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the push-pull panel, Writing Conflict and Romance. I am your moderator for the day, Aurora Rey. I'm very excited to have all of you joining us. As Sandy mentioned, feel free to chat or post comments in the chat box, but we're going to use the Q&A box to filter questions because I'm easily distracted, and that's a good place to put them all to make sure I don't miss them. I'm going to start with some introductions. Since the topic of our panel today is conflict, I asked our panelists to send me a short version of their bio, but also to throw in something they would fight to the death over. And I got some really fun responses. So let's kick things off with our newbie to BSB panels. Nancy Wheelton is a veterinarian and writes from her home in Ontario, Canada. Veterinary Partner is the first book in her lesbian romance series about veterinarians living and loving in Western Canada. Nancy practices as a veterinarian in Saskatchewan and draws her stories from her experiences. Look for book 2, Veterinary Technician, in 2021. She will fight you to the death over the fact that zucchini is not food. It poisons every dish it's added to with its zucchini-ness. I like zucchini-ness as an adjective. I really like making words, adjectives or verbs. I like zucchini though, so I'll steer clear of even section. Next up, we have Yolanda Wallace. She is not a professional writer, but she plays one in her spare time. Could have fooled me. Her love of travel and adventure has helped her pen numerous globe-spanning novels, including the Lambda Award-winning Month of Sundays and Tailor Made. Loved Tailor Made, for the record. She will fight you to the death for possession of the TV remote. I would happily give you. I will give you the TV remote. I'm terrible at manning the remote. People always yell at me, so I would give it to you. Next up, we have Dena Blake, who is a romance writer, eternal optimist, would-be chef, tech nerd, and occasional auto mechanic. Her books are steamy, sometimes funny, and always full of angst. She will fight you to the death over food leftovers. Like,
there's a story behind that. So.
We're gonna come back to that. Next up, we have Jean Copeland. She is a multi-genre lesfic author, blogger, and educator from Connecticut. Her novel, The Revelation of Beatrice Darby, won an Alice B. Reader's Lavender Certificate and a Goldie Award for debut author. She's currently drafting her 7th and 8th novels for release in 2021. When not writing novels, Jean enjoys blogging, chatting with the women on the weekly Wind Down podcast, always a good time, and binge drinking, not necessarily in that order. She will fight you to the death over the fact that Grease 2 has a better soundtrack than the first Grease. Will you fight people to the death if they don't like Grease at all?
You have to like Grease 2. I'm sorry, but
I don't know if I've ever seen Grease 2. Okay.
It's so underrated.
We're going to have our own internal conflict on this panel, I can tell. We have with us Emily Smith, an emergency medicine physician assistant in Boston. She loves writing romance, pretending she's a runner, and spending time with her pets. She will fight you to the death over the last cup of coffee. No, but really, she says. She will. And last but not least, we have the lovely Georgia Beers, who kind of accidentally fell into writing romance. 26 books later, she's still at it and still adores crafting the journey into love that her characters take. Because who doesn't love a little romance? She lives in upstate New York, whoop, whoop, and her goals in life are to drink all the wine, eat all the cheese, and pet all the animals. Those are really good life goals.
I thought so.
She says Pierce Brosnan was the best 007. Fight me.
I agree.
I actually agree with you on that one. So
it's because I grew up watching Remington Steele. So in addition to my crush on Stephanie Zimmerman at the time, I just thought he was beautiful. So when he was 007, I was very happy.
I think that's right. Well, this is a really, really exciting group. I'm very excited. And I think it's really interesting because based on the extent to which I know these authors, we have some pretty differing takes on what it means to write conflict and how much conflict goes into books. So I think we're going to have a really good conversation. I'm going to cut right to the chase. Writing conflict. Love it, hate it, why? And I'm going to start with my resident conflict lover, Dena Blake.
Oh, yeah.
You put
Anybody
it in your bio. So
yeah. Well, yeah, because anybody who reads my stuff complains about it or loves it. I don't know. But I don't know. I guess it's just, life lessons just comes out, and sometimes it gets too deep and too gushy and mushy, and I don't know. It's weird the way I think. I try to make it lighter, and sometimes I just can't. Although in the last book, I did try to make things lighter, and it worked out well. But yeah, I just love it. I don't know why. I mean, Shelley writes through my stuff and says, "Take this out. You already said it. You already said it." And I'm like, okay.
what about you, Jean? Love it or hate it?
I love it. I love it because I am in control over it, and the conflicts always end exactly the way I want them to. So that's a lot of fun. It's a nice change from real life. And I remember that my thesis advisor at college said that don't forget to complicate your conflict. And I've never forgotten his words.
I like this idea of the element of control. Like that's something that we sort of get, even if you don't like conflict in real life. Yolanda, how about you?
Hate it. It's actually the one thing I struggle with the most when I'm writing a book, because my first few books, the editor's notes are all about the conflict. You need to work on it because there is none in the book. So, I've gotten better at it over the years, but it's the one thing. It's like, I just want everybody to get along. So it's like, I start with the characters first, I get the backstory, and then conflict comes last for me. They have to make sure that it's in the book consistently, so I have to do a read through once I'm done.
I am so with you. And I'm going to now bounce to Georgia, who was waving her hands, because I know she agrees.
It's hard.
As a reader, I love it. I love it so much, especially when it's a good conflict and they're going back and forth and they hate each other, and it's just delicious because you know that they're going to end up together. But as a writer, it is the bane of my existence. I'm with Yolanda. It's the last thing I come up with. I will plan an entire book and then be like, so why can't they be together? It's just, I avoid it like the plague. It keeps me up at night. I hate it. I hate it.
At least you have a strong opinion. For something. Nancy, what about you? Your book is just now sort of out, so we don't know yet if you're a big conflict-y person or not. What's your take?
I like it when it comes to me, when I can put it together. I think it's important for this story because without it, there would be, I think you'd be missing sort of that element of suspense. Will they or won't they? And like I agree with Georgia, we know they're going to get together at the end, or it wouldn't be a romance. It's like, are they going to get there? Is it going to be a struggle? How quickly? And I think without conflict, sometimes I think my characters would be a little too much alike. So it helps me keep them kind of different and hopefully interesting.
And last but not least, Emily, what do you think? What's your opinion?
I agree with Georgia. I really hate writing conflict because it's so challenging to me. I think it's definitely the hardest part about any story I've written. The really hard part to me is that you also have to find a reason that's convincing enough that this great love would end, but also believable enough that they would be able to recover from it. And I think that's always a huge challenge for me. So that's why I personally don't like it.
I'm completely with you because, we're all adults. Can't we just talk it out if you love each other?
I'm the only one that likes it.
No, Dena likes it.
I like it.
Oh, all right, good. Okay. I was starting to worry about myself.
She'll worry, but
Okay.
Not to cause any conflicts, but I'm going to go off script already from the questions I sent you ahead of time.
Uh-oh.
Because I feel like one of the things we didn't really distinguish between was the difference between that kind of initial conflict, the tension that keeps characters from getting together in the first place, versus, I guess this is actually kind of similar to one of the questions, versus that sort of really big conflict at the end, known as the sort of, I call it the dark moment, that moment, even in a romance where you know they're going to end up together, you think maybe they're not going to end up together. How could they possibly get back together? How do you see those two as different? And do you have different opinions? Is one of them easier or harder to write? Those who love conflict, do you like one more than the other? And those of you who hate conflict, is one harder than the other to write? Sorry, that was a really convoluted question, but hopefully you can make sense of it. Emily, I'm going to start with you this time.
Wow. Okay, that was a lot to keep track of.
I'm a little hyper today.
Get off the coffee, woman.
Yeah. I don't know. I find them both kind of equally challenging. But the sort of smaller conflicts, the tension, I guess you would call it, that builds up to that final big sort of catastrophic moment, I think is more fun for me to write. I enjoy that more because I think it helps to build the characters. It's not so much a plot development to me as it is a character development, and I find that a little bit more enjoyable and a little bit easier than the sort of big thing, I guess you could call it, that is really just kind of a big part of the plot arc that I find much harder to come up with.
What about you?
Well, I start off with conflict. When the characters start popping into my head, I have to know right away what their conflict is, and then I'm just the opposite. I build the story around that. And usually what I find is if the main conflict is strong enough, the tension and the other little things that come up along the way kind of happen organically as I'm telling the story, because I know what the bigger conflict is going to be. So I kind of like jump into both of the characters' heads and kind of see which way I could derail them both, in order to make it a little more complicated when it gets to that final, moment, that dark moment.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. What about you, Georgia? As someone who doesn't like conflict, does sort of one or the other feel a little bit harder or easier? Do you like writing one or the other more?
I tend to, it works best if the smaller conflict kind of informs the larger one. So I find that I can do the smaller one, and then you can almost do a false resolution, except then something big pops out from that was either kept a secret, because that's a big deal in a romance, or was lied about, or somebody shows up. So I find if I can get them to mesh and work together, then I'm okay with both. I do find the smaller ones are a lot easier. It's easy to throw conflict at somebody, but you have to be careful with the whole, well, why don't they just have a conversation? So it's easy to create those little conflicts. I can create as long as that conversation is had. But like I said, I like it best if they are together. If the big black moment comes out of the smaller conflict that we thought was gone. And I think in my new one, in Hopeless Romantic, I kind of did that. And I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a small conflict and then a bigger one comes out of that small conflict. And that works pretty well. So I think that's kind of the best way for smoothness for me.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, the idea that they're not sort of separate, but that they sort of feed into
Correct.
each other.
Correct.
Nancy, do you have a take on that?
I'm just thinking of the book. I'm just editing book 2, a veterinary technician, and it's the conflicts. Yeah, part of character development, but those small ones that kind of make them kind of just not kind of bounce away from each other, but just kind of go, is this the right person for me? Is this the way to go? Is this person too different for me? And they kind of do this back and forth until they're kind of blindsided by the big one at the end, at your dark moment. And that's, I like doing that. It's a bit tricky because they have to kind of figure out a way to kind of make them both go, that it's not just one person running away, that they both go. So sometimes there's sort of two different threads, sort of the smaller conflicts, day to day, and then that big one hits them at towards the end.
Dena, lover of conflict, do you like that initial, the things that kind of get in the way from them coming together in the first place, or kind of that big build?
I don't like the big moment. I like the little tidbits, the breadcrumbs along the way, but I like the big blow up. So, because that's where you can really work in a lot of it. So,
She was just so hard. And Yolanda, what about you?
I'm with Georgia. I like to have the major overarching conflict be the reason they're not together, but you have to have little crumbs along the way that part of that. It's like the underlying issues to that major problem. So each chapter will have the smaller issues, and then the dark one at the end is all because of the one over the top. So once I identify the conflict, it's easy to do that, but that's the problem, identifying the conflict in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I as I've read more and written more, I think it's a very, like, figuring out how those two things kind of actually work together makes for a much better story. I think on a related note, I actually sort of found myself going back to the title of our panel, which is Push and Pull. Because I think, especially for newer writers, sometimes there's this sense that conflict is big fight, when in fact conflict is way more complicated than that. When you hear the phrase kind of push, pull, and conflict, like, what resonates for you? Like, what do you actually think about in the context of your writing and how you approach writing conflict? What are some of the sort of like things that you always keep in mind as you're trying to figure out how to make these characters work and how to put a story together? Yolanda, I'll start with you this time.
Okay, well, for me, a good romance is like a dance, except in a romance, at least one character, each character has to take the lead at some point. So it's not the same person leading all the time. So, and that's part of the push-pull. I want this and you want that. You want that and I want this. So as they get to know each other, they decide how they can actually work together. And that's the hard part of, if they're compatible and have these issues, how do you work those out?
For sure. What about you, Dena?
Some of it is your internal conflict, who you are as a person and why something's not going to work for you, how you can overcome that and actually meet that other person halfway. That's a big one because everybody, has their own thoughts and their own, I don't know how to say, how you were brought up, different things like that. And those are biggies a lot of times in relationships. And that's a lot of the internal that I see.
Emily?
I kind of touched on this earlier, but I think that for me, I think about trying to create a conflict that is both believable, but also something that's going to make it good for a good story. And I mean, when I think about things that typically break people up, right? It's kind of often like mundane, things just fizzled out over time, or I didn't like the way that they cleaned the bathroom, or, just kind of boring everyday things. There's often not this big one catastrophic, climactic event that ends a relationship. And so I think the things that you often think about, or it's something, people don't necessarily want to read about, like, some horrible cheating scandal. And so it's hard to find a conflict that is believable enough and interesting enough that people want to read about, that will break a couple apart who have built this great love, which hopefully you've built at this point, but then also be surmountable, that they can get over it. And that is something I struggle with in every single story. So that's what I think of when I think about the push-pull. What's going to be believable to the reader that would be big enough to break them up, but also something that you believe that they can overcome.
Georgia, I thought I saw you scribbling a little note.
Yeah, my memory is not so good anymore. So if you ask a question and I have an answer and then I go last, it's gone by the time you get to me. So I'm like, I got to write this down. So what I wrote is that actually when I think of the push-pull between characters, I think about that smaller conflict. And a lot of times it is reflected by their jobs. So they're on opposite sides of something, or, like someone's the real estate agent who's going to buy this building that's been in this woman's family for generations, that kind of thing. So there's like the automatic, I hate you, but God, you're sexy. And so that push-pull is there automatically for me. I don't so much have the push-pull in mind with the big black moment, because I feel like at that point, as Emily said, there's already been the love built and now we're going to rip it down. So it's not so much of a push-pull as it is a bomb going off. But for me, the push-pull is the small stuff and the things that are conflicts, but can turn like that. I think the best kind of push-pull is an argument between two people that don't know each other very well and are on opposite sides, but are attracted to each other. And so they're snarky, but there's like a grain of flirting in there. You can see it and it's kind of sexy. And I find that's what I try to shoot for with small conflicts in the push-pull, is that little bit of snark that will turn into something better.
Very conducive to the office romances that you...
Yes, it is, as a matter of fact. I've written 1 or 2 of those.
Mhm.
Or 7.
Jean?
What Dena said really resonates with me, because I always keep in mind that even though the characters both came out of my head, I have to make them to 2 different people. They have to see things differently. And just by virtue of them getting to know each other, not really understanding their quirks, not really understanding how, yes, they may have a general consensus on what they believe, but there's all those little nuances that when the characters are really attracted to each other, really growing feelings for each other, sometimes those little nuances spark a bigger conflict. And actually, that's sort of what's going on in my work in progress, Poison Pen. I'm relying this time on misunderstanding to kind of create all that little tension here and there, and then when the big moment happens, it doesn't really come as a big shock, because it's more along the lines of, we don't really know each other that well. We're 2 different people, and we're trying to navigate this together. But then this huge misunderstanding or smaller misunderstanding leads to a bigger one.
And Nancy. I'm totally going to lose track of who I call on at some point in this panel, so just be warned. Nancy, I have not called on you yet.
Right. The push and pull. The pull is the conflict that we talked about, the things about them or that pull the characters apart. I think of the push. I think I'm in agreement with most of the other speakers. I think it is sort of those events or those things that push them together, whether they're external conflicts or something internal that draws them. And I think it's a way to kind of torture your characters a little bit. They're sort of, taking a step back because there's some conflict there, some disagreement, but because of their jobs or because of, mutual friends, they have to coexist, and they're thrown together. And my books take place in a small town in rural Saskatchewan of about 6,000 people, and you can picture how big the lesbian community there is going to be. If you decide you're just not going to get along with someone, you may find yourself at home on your own. So these people have to find a way to coexist in that group, and just kind of you just basically get along, and it's fun to kind of throw them together, whether they want to be there or not.
Excellent answers. I'm feeling a little more positive about conflict as this conversation goes on. I'm actually going to hop over to the Q&A box because we have some really good questions coming in. I want to make sure we get to as many of those as possible. From Anonymous, they want to know if it's harder, easier, or no different writing conflict in these anxiety-loaded times that we find ourselves living in. And I'm actually going to add another layer to that. Is it affecting your writing, but also is it affecting the kind of things you want to read? So Nancy, actually, let's start with you this time.
For myself, I don't find that the sort of what's going on in the world affects my writing. I think actually diving into my book, even if it's editing, and that can be such a slog, it's actually a way to decompress. I wouldn't say I'm hiding, but it's a happy place in the book. My books aren't historical romances by any means, but they take place maybe 5-10 years ago. So you know, these folks aren't dealing with some of today's issues. So yeah, it just seems to tick along for me. You know, certainly we've had the issues and the quarantine because I'm in Canada, but for myself, I've never stopped working. We just kind of moved home to the computers and worked more from there. So yeah, there's a lot that's just ticked along. Just speaking personally for myself.
Yeah, for sure. Georgia, what about you? Because you said you actually normally like to read pretty high conflict stuff.
Yeah, I do. It's interesting. The whole thing, the world is terrible right now, and I don't want to sound like I'm not affected by it because I absolutely am. But I think for me, because I write full time and I live alone and I write from home, my overall world, not even overall, my internal world has not changed all that much. I haven't found myself struggling with my creativity because I feel like if there were ever a time when the world needs more happy, maybe even fluffy, fun and flirty things to read, it's now. So I want to keep cranking those things out. But that doesn't mean I'm not aware. I have very close writer friends who are struggling with their creativity. They just can't find it. I have people who have kids that, you know, they don't know what they're going to do with school. I have people very close to me who may have differing views than I do as to what is safe and what is not. So those things do weigh on my mind. I think I'm pretty good at setting that stuff aside so that I can do my job. And when I'm focused on my job, I am okay. It's when I'm not. It's when I come out of the job bubble that the world feels heavy. I think for some people it's the other way around, that they try to get into their creativity bubble and they just can't because of the weight of the world right now. But for me, it's the other way around. And when I'm at the computer and I'm building this romance or I'm creating these people, I feel like I need to do it more now than ever for the people who need to read something that's happy, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And has it affected your sort of reading or other sort of like entertainment?
It really hasn't, because I feel like the stuff that I watch scary movies and I watch thrillers because I want to see the bad guy get caught. That's why I like those things. My least favorite horror movie is when the bad guy gets away with it. That makes me mad. I want the bad guy to get caught. So when I watch this stuff or I read a thriller or a suspense novel, it's because I want to see the bad people get caught and get what they deserve. And since that's not happening in the world right now, I will read those things and I will watch those things.
It's a little bit like Jean's thoughts on having control of the universe.
Exactly.
Jean, what about you? What are your, how are you navigating writing and conflict and what you do to unwind?
This pandemic has affected my writing for sure. This whole year for me so far has been garbage, and I'm hopeful that, you know, the 2020 is going to eke out something good at the end. But I find that the whole flip to the switch of the life that I knew pre-pandemic has affected my ability to focus. And you know, I've always had trouble writing or focusing long enough to. You know, I'd like to produce 2 novels a year, but usually, unless I'm writing with somebody else, I can only get 1 to begin with. So it has, and I've had to come up with ways to kind of force myself using writing as an escape. But yeah, I mean, I definitely feel for other authors who have had to switch everything up because of what's going on. It hasn't been easy.
Dena?
It hasn't probably changed the angst in my writing at all, but when this whole thing all started, I mean, I was just thrown headfirst into my day job. So that impacted my writing a lot. And since it started, ended up bringing everything at home. I work from home now for my day job, and then I write as well. So I had to learn to cut it off, to cut my day job off, only start at a certain time and end at a certain time unless it was absolutely impossible to do that, so that I could get back into that writing mode. And it took me a while to do that, and it was exhausting, but I got back on track, and now, even though I do extra time at work, I still have a certain cutoff where I just have to break free of that and go back to my imaginary world. So, because, I don't even watch the news half the time anymore because it just is so depressing. I mean, maybe once, twice a week just to see where we're at, but, you've all experienced it. So, it's that's how it's impacted me. So.
Yeah. Emily, what about you?
I think the biggest way that it's affected me just is the loss of motivation. I've just had kind of a lack of motivation to do many things at this point in time, including write. And I think it's just the state of the world and my job and everything over the last several months has just taken a lot of energy, physically, emotionally. And so I've just completely kind of lost track and stepped away from my writing. And it's something I'm still working on sort of getting back to, because I know that it's one of those things, at least for me, where once I make the effort to get started, I'm really glad I did it. But it's just making that effort to sit down regularly and write. And it's hard because it's not my full-time job. And so I really have to carve that time in, which obviously can be really challenging with life and everything else going on and having to earn a paycheck and all the other things. And so it's been even more challenging to try to make that time.
And Yolanda, what about you?
Yeah, I've had the same problem. I'm busier now because of the pandemic at my day job than I was before, because I'm a manager of my team, so I have to reach out to the team to make sure that they're okay. Because I work at a bank, and everybody who doesn't work in a branch has to work remotely. So, but some of them are struggling with the remoteness of it, because they were in a branch before, and they like having people around them. So I have to reach out to them to make sure they're okay. And then I'm doing 12-hour days. It's like, I don't want to write once I'm done, because I've been working since 6 o'clock this morning. Let's just relax. But I started writing short stories actually a couple weeks ago, just to get back into the groove of things, and actually can feel the creativity coming back. So I'm like, I need to, like Dena, set a time. I'm not going to work at this point or these days on my day job and go back to the writing. But it's finally starting to get that work-life balance back, and that took a couple of months to get there.
Yeah, for sure. I feel you. I'm doing the work from home thing too, and I literally I try to do everything at one station. I have a now nicer work computer set up, and it was a disaster. I actually have to have separate little pieces. I'm going to go right over here. I'm going to come work over here. It's funny the things we've had to do.
I also remember seeing a meme not too long ago that said something like, "Introverts, put down your book and go check on your extrovert friends because they are not okay."
It's so true. I've been sort of thriving in the at-home bubble for the most part. I still feel like I get enough people. But my extrovert friends are struggling.
Agreed.
We've got some really cool craft questions coming in. I'm going to combine a couple because I don't think we'll have time to get to everything. But how do you find the right balance of enough conflict, not too much, and or how do you create authentic kind of wrenching conflict between characters but still make them likable? So kind of two variations on that same sort of puzzle. Everyone's kind of no one's making eye contact now.
I actually had an editor's note about that on one of my books. She's like that if you have someone who has a conflict or they're a villain, make sure they're not a mustache twirling villain like in the old cartoon. So make sure that whatever they're doing is something that seems reasonable and not just something that a cartoon character would do.
I think there's a line when you do the conflict. I think you have to make sure that whichever of them is going to do, they have to be able to come back from it. And there are, everybody's got a different compass for that. But I think if you're going to, it can't be so bad that half your readers are like, I'm out, I'm out. This person is ruined for me. And sometimes that's a fine line. Sometimes it's a fine line, but I think you have to be careful of that. And I think that believability in the conflict is the biggest thing. It has to be, and I think Emily said earlier, it has to be believable, but it's got to be solvable. It's got to be, when they fix it, your reader has to believe that that's how they fixed it and that made sense. They can't be like, this is so far-fetched. I mean, the last thing you want is a far-fetched conclusion to your romance. So it's got to be believable, and it's got to be horrific enough, but not so horrific that they can't come back from it.
Jean?
Yeah, I actually, picking up what Georgia said, in the Ashford place, I had a character who she was really like, had her integrity in check most of the story, and then something happens, and she starts twirling her mustache pretty good for a time. But I kind of like the way that I did it is that I usually like to write characters that have lots of flaws, and that like you're like, would I be friends with this person in real life? And I always say yes, because I think about how imperfect I am. So I try to, when I know a character's going to do something bad, I try to have her set up as somebody who is trying to do the best she can. But a lot of times in life, we make bad choices sometimes without meaning to. And I checked one of my reviews once on the Ashford Place. I try not to do that. But the one of the readers this particular reader couldn't get over what this character did, and how ultimately the other character forgave her. So it's definitely an issue that I grapple with whenever I want somebody to do something really wrong, and it really is a fine line to balance that really bad thing with somebody who's worth redemption.
Emily, how do you navigate?
I agree with Georgia that I'm going to have to start writing these questions down, because by the time we get here, I've totally missed the point. I think
notes.
Yes, thank you. But I also wanted to kind of reiterate what Georgia had said earlier about, I think that the best balance as far as conflict and not conflict, I don't know what you want to call the antonym of that in that case, but is that angst and sort of heated tension with just that hint of attraction and sexual tension, and that finding that balance in dialogue particularly can, I think, really make or break a book. And it can also be really the most fun part to write, where you're building this relationship with these characters, where there's this underlying conflict, usually situational. I agree, there are differing jobs or opposite sides of the pond there, and then there's, so that they hate each other for those reasons, but then there's this sort of undeniable spark that kind of leaks through every time they interact. And I think in both what I've read and tried to write, I think to me that makes the best balance of conflict and not conflict.
What do you think? How do you, as someone who writes kind of high angst, how do you work that line of like not getting your reader to sort of throw the book across the room?
Well, sometimes I fail at that. I mean, clearly with the Friends Without Benefits, I had a best friend in there, and some people really connected with that character. They've had friends like that, and others said, oh, no way. There's no way. I hate this character. And I felt my only good thing about that was that they hated that character enough, so I must have impacted them in some way, Right. But it is a fine line as to whether somebody is going to like it or not, and whether they can actually be redeemable. So.
And Nancy, what about you?
Well, I agree with Dena that fine line. I have more trouble sometimes, trying to get to that big conflict and I think to myself, oh, come on, you're adults, just sit down, have a conversation. And I think if that's all it would need to solve the conflict, then I usually have to make it bigger. But actually, I did that in my second book, Veterinary Technician. A mutual friend gets to the point where she's just like, I'm locking you both in the garden shed until you have a conversation. And she doesn't actually do it, but spoiler alert. But it is a fine line between too much and not enough, for sure.
Well, and sometimes we know people just don't talk. They ignore things until they just explode. So, but not everybody in life experiences that.
So I'm going to take just one more because I want to talk a little bit about what you're working on now and where people can find you. So quickly, advice for a writer who is conflict avoidant, approaching a story. How do you figure out how to work in a good, realistic, compelling amount of conflict in a story if you don't like conflict?
As a newbie, I'm going to jump in and say a really great editor is huge, and reading books by other authors, the group here today, I think, oh, that's how it's done. So learning from everybody, but a really great editor who just say it the way it is, for me.
I think if you are, you have to have a conflict of some kind. There's got to be something in there. And if you're not sure what you want to do, then I would start with having it be situational. Emily had said something about it being situational, and I said that earlier. Have it be their circumstances. They're on opposite sides for whatever reason. They're competing for the same job, or they're salespeople in the same company, or they're lawyers on opposite sides. Make it situational first, and then it's possible that you can come up with something as you go along that will fit in with the two of them and be a little bit bigger.
Right, and think about it in terms of your character's growth, because a lot of times most times it's the only way that the character can change from beginning to end. You always have to have your main characters be dynamic. So, what is it that's going to come between them that's going to make them grow as individuals, and then also together as a couple? Because that's the ultimate goal, is that happily ever after. But it's not. You need the happily ever after is the payoff. They have to fight for it, and I just think about it as, well, what will be fun? What will be fun to put these two characters into, and then watch them try to get out. I think I do a little mustache twirling myself when I'm doing this. But yeah, what will be the most fun for me to watch these two poor souls try to work their way out and become better people at the end?
Torture your characters.
And look at their core values and what makes them different to begin with. Why they see things differently, and then write it up, send it to Sandy, and she'll ask you like 20 questions, and then
She will.
She'll say, I need this more. She's awesome.
She really is.
Yeah, you have to be open to suggestions, because a good editor and a good beta reader can give you ideas you hadn't thought of before, and you can run with those.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to dive into the exciting promo portion of our program. So I'd like each of you to tell us kind of what your current release is. Feel free to hold it up for our audience. You've got it handy. And tell us what you're working on now and when we might expect to see it. Nancy, let's start with you, our newbie.
Back a bit. Hey, it comes out backwards. So that if you got a mirror to this, it says Veterinary Partner. That's book 1 in the series, and that just came out on Bold Strokes Books there in June. And then the one I'm just working on now, in its final stages of editing, and if you can read this one backwards, this is Veterinary Technician. Again, it takes place in the same community. It's a character I met in book 1, and I quite liked her in book 1. We all have those characters, and you're like, I need to find her a girlfriend. So I did in book 2. Because I am a veterinarian, the books take place around a veterinary clinic, and animals that are sick and need treatment and need help. And it's always a struggle not to make it a textbook. You know, just put enough in there. So this one, veterinary technician, I believe, beginning of 2021.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Dena?
Just Me Every Day is out now. It came out in July. It's a kind of a Groundhog Day book where Wynn gets a chance to go back in time and win her love of her life. But she has to get the day right. Everything has to be perfect for her to move on. So it was a fun book. I think a little more difficult to write than I thought it would be. Writing the same day differently every day was difficult. But so that's out now. Coming out next year is Next Exit Home, about a veterinarian. Wish I knew Nancy was a veterinarian before I finished writing that. And that's about somebody who goes back to her hometown and has some conflict in the clinic that her dad owns and runs, because the person running it was somebody from her past in high school that she had some conflict with then. So that's out at the beginning of 2021. So
Awesome. Emily?
My most recent release, First Do No Harm, just came out a couple weeks ago. This is about an emergency medicine resident who meets an ER physician assistant, and they're sort of developing a conflict and throughout the time working together. And then we also have brought back some characters from the book before this, All of Me, who were the primary characters in the last book, Galen and Rowan, who are pretty heavily featured in this book as well.
Fantastic. And you're trying to carve out time to get back to me.
Yeah, I've got something going. Sorry, that's my cat, Charlie. He's very nosy.
sorry.
I'll keep this brief because I've mentioned it in a couple other webinars. But back in October, after Women's Week, I decided to start working on something new. And because I really like writing medical romance, I thought I would continue with that theme, and I thought this time I'll take it out of the hospital. Maybe I can do a Doctors Without Borders kind of thing. Didn't really know a whole lot about that. Always really enjoyed like virus and outbreak movies, and so I was talking to my girlfriend, and we said, "Oh, let's make a virus book." So I started writing a book about a pandemic and a CDC doctor and a military doctor who used to know each other in medical school and then meet in the field again and reconnect. And it's a flu-like pandemic illness, and it hit very close to home accidentally. And so I got, 10,000, 15,000 words into it, and it's kind of come to a screeching halt for obvious reasons. I would like to go back to it, and I have tried to a couple times, but I'm still kind of trying to gently figure out how to navigate that. I don't want to give up on it yet, but I also want to be careful with it because obviously it's touchy subject matter, and I want it to be a romance and not a story about COVID. So
Thanks, Emily. Now we know where it came from.
Jean, current release upcoming?
Release. One Woman's Treasure came out this month, and it is a friends to lovers romance about two women who, they're very different women, but they're kind of in the same stage of their lives, and that's sort of what draws them together, is that need for friendship, considering that their lives have experienced change. And then of course the friendship is going along so perfect that, well, let's complicate it by having them catch feelings for each other. And then in 2021, I have a collaborative project with Jackie D and Aaron Zach called Swift Vengeance, and it's sort of like a serial killer romance murder thing. So that's pretty wild that we're working on right now. That should be out in June. And then my own novel, Poison Pen, that's probably going to come out in early fall. And that is what happens when a writer who uses a pseudonym meets a blogger who uses a pseudonym, and they fall in love. And I had alluded to the idea of misunderstandings So that's what you'll see in Boys and Pen.
Very exciting stuff. Yolanda?
Current release is Heart of a Killer. It is a romantic intrigue with a contract killer and a tech company CEO. Actually have 2 works in progress. I have to decide which one to give more attention to. One is 2 exes who are trying to work together to salvage a sunken ship that has supposed to have buried treasure on it. And the other one is set in Alaska, featuring a truck driver and a convenience store clerk. They're trying to figure out how to have a relationship in real life when everything's been done virtually. So that's being affected by the COVID, by having to put in social distancing and everything else.
Fun stuff. Very exciting. And last but not least, Georgia?
I have currently Hopeless Romantic, which is available right now at the Bold Strokes website and everywhere else on August 11th, I believe. This is about a divorce lawyer who is a hopeless romantic and a wedding planner who does not believe in love. And then in December, I have 16 Steps to Forever. And I just sent the first draft of The Secret Poet into my editor. That will be out next April. And I am ready to start a series about 3 cousins whose family owns a bar. And so they hang out at the bar, and then it'll be a 3-book series with each of them finding love. So I'm a little busy.
Very, very busy. Exciting times. Thank you all so much. We're just over our time. I wanted to do super, super quickly, easiest place for people to find you, website, Facebook, wherever. Quick rounds, Georgia.
Everywhere. I'm on Facebook, Twitter. I have a website, georgiabeers.com, and I'm always online because I have no life.
Yolanda.
Facebook or the Bold Strokes website.
Awesome. Emily.
Facebook or Bold Strokes website.
Jean.
Facebook, Insta, Bold Strokes, and I have a blog page, jeancopeland.wordpress.com.
Dena.
Facebook, Twitter, Insta, and I have denablake.com.
Awesome. And Nancy.
NancyWheelton.com and through Bold Strokes Books.
Awesome. I would like to thank all of you for coming out today, panelists and audience members. This is so much more fun than the Zooms that occupy most of my workday. It's lovely to see you all. I'm sorry we're not face-to-face. Thank you to everyone who came. I'm sorry we didn't get to quite all the questions. Thank you to the panelists. Don't forget the Bookathon sale. It's been scrolling through the chat feed. If you are on the phone and don't have that, I'm sure if you reach out to us, we can get you the link. Thank you all so much. Thank you, panelists. It's been fantastic talking with you.
Thank you, Aurora.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Aurora.